Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today I want to impart on you the notion that some men a long time ago might have come up with a theory that explains all reality as you perceive it. No joke. As we have all of these different movies like The Matrix and, Inception and all kinds of different spiritual films and, paranormal films thrown at us with our own research and our own experience, you can get confused pretty quickly about where you are. But one of the things that we think is actually occurring right now, I think it's pretty evident, is everyone's really kind of trying to figure out, where are we? Why do I see things a little bit different than someone else? How come I feel like I completely can see all the evidence of something, but my friend who's not stupid can't see a single word I'm saying? And they're trying to explain some other gobbledygook to me on the side. Well, in this episode of Holographic Universe, based on a book written by a gentleman, Michael Talbert, we're only going to borrow his presentation. I'm not sure I believe everything that he believes, and we're going to put some disclaimers in for some of the stuff he mentioned in his book, but he covers the research of the gentleman who created the hologram back in 1947, Dennis Gabor, G-A-B-O-R, and a gentleman named Bohm, B-O-H-M, who took that holographic mechanism and said, oh my God, this looks like the way that the consciousness of the human body, mind, body, soul, and everything else that's not mentioned in those paradigms actually perceives reality. And it's all based on how a hologram's created. When he saw how a hologram was created, he had a light bulb go off in his mind. Now, there's four primary researchers that really push forward this holographic universe metaphor for how everything comes together. If you hang out till the end of the episode, you will literally have a mechanism to live your life in a very technical and spiritual manner to potentially curb and control and interpret the entire universe to your will. At least some of the best seconds you could possibly experience from the one you're in right now. So I know most viewers get about 45 minutes and take a break and come back. Make sure you get to the end of this one. I'm not kidding. This could change your life completely. And talk about giving you the reins to your life, right? You've been on the back of the stagecoach bouncing around while there's no one driving the thing. Sometimes it feels like that. We're going to stop time, pick you up, put you in the front seat, and give you the reins. And it's going to seem completely logical on how to steer the stagecoach wherever you want to go in the adventure that is reality. No joke. It all starts with how a hologram's made. And we've all seen holograms. If you've ever been to Disneyland, Haunted Mansion, it's a really good experience. Once you go through the elevator experience and you're unloading from the elevator to get in your car to go on the ride, there's these two holograms. I'll show it in the video. One's an old guy and one's an old woman. And they're just stern and looking at you. It's a statue someone carved. One of them has a pretty phallic hairdo, by the way. But you walk past it and it follows you and they're kind of looking at you real mean. And a lot of times we see these things and, we don't know how they're made and we don't care. And other times, we want to know how they're made, but where do you go to find out? And of course, today we have all kinds of resources. I'm going to be cutting in frames for one of the best YouTube videos I've ever seen on the subject matter. I'll put it in the description. So if you're curious about how these things are made, definitely check this out. But it was invented, again, in 1947. The way they describe it was invented by an accident. But once you see the setup, it's kind of hard to believe that this would actually be an accident because the film itself was special. The setup of two lasers was very special. So if this was an accident, we have Dennis Gabor, what must have been one of the most brilliant human beings on planet Earth. He has to have been. But this requires a single laser that's usually split into two beams. And of course, when you do that, you have them matching each other. So a laser is a What is it? Light amplified by stimulating emission radiation. That's what it stands for, big whoop. It has a frequency, and that means the sine cosine wave going up and down, the rate at which it goes up and down is the frequency of it, is the frequency. The rate at which it goes up and the amount it goes up and the amount it goes down, how high the hills and valleys are, that's the amplitude. Well, there's certain film that loves certain frequencies, and so they just tune this whole thing up with the film that they've got, and then they have to set up the hologram. So what I'm going to describe is one that's in this video. They created a desktop and a physical desktop in the real world, and they put all these really cool items in, including this really cool glass sort of pitcher or something. It's just a piece of exotic art glass. So some of the hologram is going to be looking through glass. So light's going to actually refract a little bit as you turn the final product, which you'll see, it's actually distorting light just like it would normally do if you were looking at it, except one exception. This is going to use a green laser for this example I'm going to show you in the photos, but you could use other frequencies. Whenever you use a different frequency, the final product that you see in the hologram is going to be that light. So if you have a green laser, it's going to be a green hologram. Everything in it's green. Instead of black and white, it's green and nothing, right? Same thing with the red one. But they split this beam into two for a very specific reason. It's kind of important to understand the first laser more than anything else. Now, when you walk into a room of any kind and you turn a light on when it's dark, you immediately subconsciously know, well, hey, if the ceiling has the light, then it's going to splash down in sort of a cone, and then underneath surfaces that are opaque, there's not going to be any light. You'll have shadow. But if you click a switch of a lamp that's on your nightstand, well, it's going to splash from that region. Everything that's not being hit by light is dark. So what the hologram does using laser light is that Gabor, he basically figured out, okay, wait a minute. What's actually happening when light hits objects? Let's just take three objects to cover sort of the three spectrums of how light might behave. We got a teddy bear, a cue ball, and a piece of glass. Well, when light goes through the glass, it's going to actually bend and refract. Right? It's going to bend the light a little bit. You've seen this a million times when you hold a glass up to your face. Look through the bottom of a Coke bottle. You've seen this lens effect that occurs, right? Well, if it's a cue ball, well, that's pretty darn shiny. It reflects a lot of white light off of it. It's a little off-colored depending how old it is. But the teddy bear, well, you do see the teddy bear. It doesn't absorb all the light, but it is absorbing quite a bit of light. It doesn't burn your eyes when you look straight at it. What this guy figured out was, what's the difference between holographic film and normal black and white film? We won't get into color because it can get a little complicated. Well, black and white film, when you buy it, it's in a box, and obviously if it gets exposed to light before it gets locked down with chemicals, the whole page turns black. Whatever's hit by light turns black, just like burning it. Whatever doesn't get hit by light stays white. That's why negatives are the opposite of the picture that was taken. It's so brilliant what these guys figured out back in the day. So when you expose, you put the negative in, you expose it for a number of seconds, stop exposing, and it's a black room or it's got red light where it's not going to work on the film a little bit. Then you pull the film out, you've seen it a million times, 3 different tanks, and it locks the particles in that paper such that forever you have a photograph. Well, a hologram piece of film is transparent, and it's got a little bit of thickness to it. It's incredibly brilliant, but incredibly simple. Now, you know that when you use your eyeballs, you stare at a room, and that little kind of box that your eyes can see, that's called a frustum. It's just this box that comes off your head that sends all the light into your head. And you know that if you could recreate the right eye and the left eye the way you saw a room, like a Viewmaster, you start to see everything in 3D. That's why you have to wear those glasses when you go to a 3D movie theater. Okay? So what this genius did was he created film that records the frequency of light exactly the way you would have seen it had you actually looked through the piece of film right when they set up this desktop. Because they set up a desktop, then we have a nice 16:9 negative, right? It's a clear sheet of this plastic stuff. It looks like plastic nothingness, right? And that's the way you're going to look into the hologram when it's finished. But we have two laser beams. One laser beam is going to bounce off all the stuff that we set up. And as it bounces off, it creates ripples. But when the ripples hit each other, they usually compound into a slightly heavier frequency. Well, it's going to do different stuff on different objects. It's amazing. If something's blue, it's going to reflect a blue frequency, even though in the end product will only be green. It's going to behave a little bit differently. And this is so sensitive when they set this thing up that usually people leave the room. If you wanted to be in the room, you have to orient your body away from the exposure because your breath can blur the image. If you had a big 4-inch by 4-inch cube of aluminum and put it on the desktop where you're going to expose this thing, and you can set it up and see how it's behaving before you actually expose it. If you actually tickled it with a feather on one side of a cube of heavy, lead, it sends ripples all around the object. That's how sensitive this exposure process is. But here's what's happening. This first laser that hits the entire desktop causes this three-dimensional ripple in all vectors, just the exact same way you see a room. And then it goes right at the film. And the film, instead of just being, if it's hit by light, it turns black. If not, it stays normal. It's actually recording the frequency of light and a thickness of this film, such as the light's going up and down from this laser and interfered with all these different objects, it splashes out perfectly in the film. The second laser has to be present because when they want to play this thing back to you, we have to be able to yank the image off the film so you can see it. And remember, it's a split from the original laser, so they're synced up perfectly. The frequencies and amplitudes are perfect. And the second laser comes in and hits the film directly without bouncing on anything. When you play it back, all you have to do, once you develop this film, which goes through a chemical process very similar to normal film, all they have to do is hit that piece of plastic film with the second laser, tuned to exactly the frequency that they created it with. And now all of a sudden, you could look around inside the image, up, down, backwards. It's so accurate that they created a hologram once of a microscope sitting on a desk. And they oriented the eyepiece directly at the user of the film, right? So right at the film. You can actually orient the photograph such that you're staring right down the barrel of the microscope, and you'll find out they were looking at a microchip. How amazingly accurate is that? If that wasn't amazing enough, you can cut out a piece of that big giant exposure. Matter of fact, if you had a 10-inch by 10-inch exposure and you cut it every inch horizontally, and then you take the strips and you cut them every inch vertically, so you have 100 pieces of that hologram. You could take any one of those pieces, hit it with the laser, and the entire image is inside that piece. Mind-blowing, right? But what does this have to do with Bohm? And what does this have to do with my promise that by the end of this episode, you're going to have a paradigm to live your entire life that potentially could include everything you've ever heard about that's tangibly real, including the paranormal, spirituality, dreams, and an afterlife? Well, Bohm eventually came around with, it's David Bohm, B-O-H-M, Carl Prembram, Elaine Aspect, Stanislav Graf. This is a psychologist, a neuropsychologist, a person who specialized in quantum experiments, and Graf, who had a degree in psychiatry. What Bohm was able to figure out by looking at this was he said, now, what's going on here again? And they said, well, there's all these objects that really exist, and what we're doing is we're bouncing a bunch of frequencies off this stuff, and it's being caught in the film in a three-dimensional layered manner such that it stores part of the frequency of light that was created by just splattering this thing with light. We didn't do anything technical. This is just done by design. A secondary laser is then looking at it and bringing it back to life, so you can see what we recorded when we exposed this thing. So what Bohm was looking at is he said, now wait a minute. There's a lot of experiments out there in the world that when observed, they behave differently than when they're not observed. Well, if the eye doesn't immediately rasterize in the brain what you're seeing, if the eye sends what it sees to the brain first in some bias circuitry and then gets to your visual cortex, then are you really seeing what's really there? And in order to explain this, they came up with two sort of intricate words to say, but they refined it with a third word, which will help us have the conversation without constantly saying this. The two words he came up with was that reality, that whatever's really there, which man may not ever truly be able to see in its naked perfectness, is called the implicate. It implies itself to you, I would say. Your eyeballs, viewing things, see things in what they call the explicate. So the implicate is sort of the objective objects that really exist in the universe, and you're viewing it and putting it through your bias circuitry, which may not obviously be hindered by anything involved with the actual brain itself, which we do not understand how the brain works. We can injure the brain and cause various things to occur, but it's interesting how inconsistent the theories of where memories are stored in the brain actually occur. But as you observe something, you're that second laser. The first laser is bouncing all the stuff and making it mechanically possible for you to see the reality. And you're the explicate. You are unfolding reality is the other easy word that they've created. I think that's great. So let's take a step back and say, does anything really exist? I mean, does it really exist? Well, let's say that you and I plan a trip to go someplace we mutually have never been before, to see something we have never seen before in photograph, in a movie, or anything. And some third party has figured this out. Have you ever been to, Lithuania? No. Okay, well, there's going to be a place I'm going to take you. You're going to be blindfolded from the airport into the car, taken straight to this location. You're going to be stood side by side, shoulder to shoulder. And we're going to pull the blindfolds off at the exact same time. Maybe it's even super sophisticated. The lenses of our glasses are just smoked out, and all of a sudden, boom, they get unsmoked. So we see it at the exact same time with shutter glasses. Would we see the same exact thing? Well, probably. The idea is to say, well, describe what you see 10 feet up. And they may have a sign there that's literally been attached to the building. Maybe it's not even a fancy building. Maybe it's just a sign that says a word. And we're both English-speaking people. The sign's in English. We're fairly literate, and we speak a one-syllable word. What do you see at 20 feet? It's an experiment to see if the implicate really exists. Are we capable of seeing the exact same thing without any predetermined existence inferred on us? The Eiffel Tower is in my mind. As a baby, apparently, I've been in it a couple times as a kid. I don't remember that at all. But I'm sure it exists because I've seen it on the TV, right? I've seen it in photographs. We know that there's people out there that when they look in the mirror, they see themselves as morbidly obese. The reality is they weigh under 100 pounds and should be rushed to a hospital for malnutrition and rehabilitated up. But somehow, we're told they see themselves as obese in the mirror. And when they see the emaciated version, whatever their brain is doing, they're adding the pounds back on, so they think they usually hit a rate where they think they look super beautiful. But they need to gain 40 pounds to not be in a state of potential death, right? Have you ever wondered how that was possible? I mean, we all know about the little differences we have with who we think is attractive in the world. And of course, there's biases. Certain cultures think certain body types are really beautiful. And then the Europeans back in the past, a voluptuous woman was considered it. And then, of course, let's look at the 70s and 80s. Oh, you had to be just, a Pilates instructor, otherwise you weren't pretty. And then it's flexed back the other way now. How is that bias occurring? With the woman who looks in the mirror, who weighs 85 pounds, and perhaps sees someone who's 125 pounds and utterly perfect. I would suggest that Bohm is onto something. Her explicit unfolding of reality is giving her massive bias of what she really looks like. Okay, where is this going to go? Well, it's important that you remember that you were told you have 5 senses. The reality is you most likely have an infinite amount of senses. And within the 5 categories of senses, there's probably infinite senses within those senses. But just like the kid, Sixth Sense, where you can see dead people, that was a whole sense is not in the first 5, right? People who see auras, that's a whole different sense. And auras, if they're truly capable, and I've got some stories in my life that from friends of mine that were utterly changed for life when they experienced. I've told these on the show a couple times, many years ago. I believe this can be done. But even aura viewing has different levels of aura viewing. Some people can only see around the head. Some people can see around the whole body. Some people can see into the body. Native Americans that would take, I should say, like Peruvian Indians down in South America, if they took ayahuasca, there's all kinds of tribes that do it, of course. There are, statements where they could look into a human body and see malfunctions and advise people to go to hospitals and get procedures. And they would do sonograms and x-rays and find out, oh my God, this person had an obstruction in their intestine. But what are the benefits of understanding how this thing works? Well, I have people in my life right now that literally unfold reality in a positive manner simply because however they were raised was utter perfection. That's the only way I can describe it. They do not allow in negativity. They would say the statement, there's no such thing as problems, only solutions. And they always find them. And this is in every category of everything. It's tremendous. And I've also had friends in my lifetime whose families raised them with horrific historical stories about their race. And so that they felt completely disabled as human beings growing up. And they had to eventually reject this bias that their families put on them. I had a friend confide in me once. He said, man, the worst thing about growing up in my race was that they told us that we were so ignorant that we fell victim to all these things in history. And as a child, you have no idea how that clips you. It makes you believe that you're genetically incapable of truly being on top. And the skin is white, by the way. But I did an episode a long time ago. I can't remember the exact name of it because it was kind of one of the more abstract names. But I was trying to tell you folks, look, what they want you to believe is you're a refrigerator. You're a mechanical device that has electricity. But you're just a mechanical device. Open the door, what happens? It trips that little switch and the light comes on. You are nothing more complicated than that. And there is no spirit in your body. There is nothing that you can do that is not mechanical. There's no God. There's no soul. There's no energy between human beings. They want you to dumb yourself down inside your mind to being a mechanical device. And that's a horrible thing to teach people because it's so absolutely untrue. We utterly exude energy. Our skeleton, and especially our skull, is an amazing harmonic device. Have you ever heard how someone says, I felt like someone was staring at me? One of the greatest places to feel that is being in an airport. Everyone people watches in an airport. And of course, some people will dress right next to working at a brothel and they try to complain that people are looking at them. It's kind of funny, kind of weird. The idea is that if you take the eye sockets, take the eyeballs out of an eye socket and you look at a skull, just like in your chiropractor's office or whatever. You know those things look like little radar dishes in there, right? They're little concave indentations in a bone. Well, we know bones, they're flexible. So you put a frequency in on a bone and it reflects it back out. That's why you can take your key fob, if it's really low on power, put it next to your temple and it'll reach another 30 feet out and you can get your card opened up. Or if you're standing right next to it, it helps out. It's using your skull as a resonating frequency to take what little power you've got left in your fob and push it out a little bit further. So why, if you stare at another human being, can they feel you? Well, one, you are a whistle of universal electricity. As all the universe's normal flow of energy is flowing around you, what I call the ethereal system, you call it whatever you want, the quantum unit, whatever, quantum field. You could go with your Higgs boson. It's bouncing off the body and it's using every single orifice of your design to send that frequency out. And your eyeballs, what does a radar dish do? It's a concave radar dish. Everything bounces to center and then it can bounce straight out. So when you stare at someone, you're sending your energy to them. And because the energy, just like the laser beam that makes that hologram, the one that's splashing around all the objects, what is it sending? It seems insane. It's just a regular old laser with a frequency and amplitude, but it's bouncing off of things and it's hitting the film with the bias of the objects that it's bouncing off of. That's why the objects get burned into the film and not just a basic green slide, right? Well, imagine this. You are looking at someone. You're in love with them, or at least you love the way they look. And inside the frequency that you're exuding out, your mind is manufacturing a frequency of affection, of love, of approval. And that is now popping out of your eye sockets and going straight at the other human being. And they can feel very special across the room, especially if you've already hooked up the relationship. But even if not, you can look and go, man, you know I like you, right? Because I'm sending that vibe to you. And when they send it back to you, there's nothing more magical in the whole universe than that. However, when a creeper looks at another person, that's when a person, especially a female that's maybe vulnerable in a public place, can go, man, I just feel strange. Because in this pervert's brain, he is dissecting her with all kinds of wild thoughts that he doesn't have the privilege of sharing with her in the universe and thinking things he shouldn't be thinking. And she's picking up on that vibe to the degree that when she unfolds what's coming into her mind, she's more open-minded and she can feel it. She has an empathetic brain that can feel and interpret overall frequencies of things. You see how this paradigm shift in your mind can start giving you a much better understanding of what's going on second to second in your life. Now let's take the idea that you're actually unfolding the explicit version of the implicate reality. You're unfolding it with your bias. Well, what kind of biases do you think you should entertain inside your mind? What I used to say on the show a lot was, you're good at what you do. Okay, well that has to do with a lot of just habit building, right? If you discipline yourself, then you'll be a disciplined human being. But let's take that and invert it to a bias construction kit you build in your mind. You're building a bias of how you see reality in your head. And it just happens to be exactly the reality that you experience as a human being. So what biases do you want? Do you want to buy into these news articles that say you hate this race, you hate these people regardless? Do you want anyone to tell you who to hate and who to love besides yourself? And do you really want to hate anything? Right? My mom was a big proponent of not allowing me to say the word hate. And it was a little tiny thing. I thought she was a little corny for it, but boy, as I got older, it was like, that was a stroke of genius. And I'm not sure anyone in her family ever told her that. She picked it up somewhere along the line. And it was one of the greatest gifts I was ever given by her. So before this thing really takes off, this holographic universe theory, which Michael Talbert simply wrote the book, and we're going to get into some stuff now that's in the book, There's a little bit of a disclaimer for one of the instances of which he believes he's actually seeing this manifest itself. But the question became, is this real? I mean, if the theory's real, then that means that human bias on various interpretations of reality, which can be recorded, would change, right? And they had built this machine. I don't know if you've ever seen it's predominantly a Chinese game, but it's a pachinko machine. And it's a very thin, I think it's about a ½ inch thick. There's a play field behind with a bunch of pins in it. These little tiny ball bearings that are about a ½ inch in diameter. And you sling them up, just like a pinball machine, except it's a vertical system. It falls at the top, bounces down a bunch of the little pins, and they have really cool mechanisms like little flowers and stuff to catch them. But they used to build these machines without being a game. It was simply a statistical machine to figure out and to demonstrate to students that when you pitch a bunch of little ball bearings at the top of one of these little grids and you have a whole base down at the bottom that catches them, that statistically speaking, just like rolling dice, you'll get 7 most of the time. It's the most common number to make. Snake eyes and 12 are the rarest things to get. It builds a nice bell curve in the center of the bottom, or when it comes to the count of how and where the balls were actually captured. So they thought to themselves, okay, if this implicate-explicate thing is real, then we should be able to put a couple students in a room for, say, 12 hours. They're volunteering for this stuff. Think how grueling that would be. And the machine's just doing this automatically. They don't have to do anything. But it finishes, and they have to restart it, and they write down what happened. So they told the 2 students, just 2, try to move all the balls to the left. And they'd run the experiment a certain number of times, write it all down. Then try to move everything to the right and do it over again. According to these experiments, in a college campus with real science behind this, it marginally moved things to the left. It marginally moved things to the right. Any change from the average mean of this machine running means that there's some real science behind his assumption that we as human beings actually can change the implicate's behavior in our reality. Because if a ball were to fall further left than it normally does, it's really there, which means we have this relationship with reality. It isn't full-on determinism where however the universe came into existence or whether it's always been here, we actually have crafted this universe to have choice, all the way down to how mass works. So then they were branching out because this took off like a wildfire, and everyone was trying to prove that this either existed or didn't exist, and they would go off in different directions. Different scientists would go in different directions. At UCLA, there was a guy named Terry Olesen and a gentleman named Robert Allen Dale that were very interested in acupuncture. They were just interested in general, trying to find out why hands, feet, tongue, and gums have these patches where it seems to talk to the entire body through the meridians of the body, right? So when we talk about those senses that we have, wasn't it amazing? My physics teacher told us that your upper lip is the #1 place that has the most sensors for temperature change. If you think about it, well, it's going towards your face. That's one protection mechanism. The other one is, you don't want to have your face damaged because it can reduce your level of attractiveness to other people because, burns you up a little bit. What's odd about it for me is that you can actually have a piece of pizza that's flaming hot and your mouth is actually a little less sensitive than your lip. Like you can put burning stuff in your mouth, and if it touches your lip, you're on fire. The first time I ever ate a habanero pepper, eating it wasn't the worst part, but I touched my upper lip and it literally turned red. And then I touched my eyebrows. I'm like, oh my God, I touched my eyebrow and it went red. So my outer face was more sensitive. But what these folks did was they tried to figure out, are these sensory input mechanisms from reality in general? Obviously, poking it with the needle sends a very, definite message through the pain sensors and the response mechanisms in your mind to go towards perhaps internal organs. Your feet, they have a whole map for your foot that talks to all the organs up. But what they found was interesting is it seemed to be pretty homogeneous between the upper part of your body and the lower part of your body, as if you could poke your spleen, you might hit your ear, right? But it's all inside you, so they don't do that kind of thing. It's all your epidermis, your skin is the only real thing they have access to. I just had a guy come in today and tell me that he goes, we have an acupuncture 2 doors down. He's like, man, it just changed my life. Well, I think that's pretty cool. I had a friend of mine who had a flickering eyelid, and he had a treatment on the hinge of his elbow, on the top of his arm there. And he said, this guy hit me with a few. He goes, my eyelid went crazy when he hit me with this needle. And he goes, I will guarantee this cures you. And he goes, if this doesn't work, come back, or if it ever stops working, come back and I'll do it again for free. And I knew the guy for 2 years after that, and he's like, it's done. It's just the most amazing thing. It might work better for some people than others, but I've heard pretty categorical successes with that kind of stuff. What they were trying to get at is that sort of thing like, the hair stood up on the back of your neck, that old cliche. Is there any truth to that? Is there any limit to the human form in terms of how we would unfold reality, how we would take in all of these frequencies? Light's an easy one. What you see with your eyeballs is pretty easy. But again, feeling someone stare at you, again, the frequency of the stare carries the message in it, just like the message bouncing off all the stuff in the hologram and hitting the film and being recorded. Your thoughts are coming out of your eyeballs. If someone's completely out of touch with your frequency range, that you could stare at them all day and they'd be like, they don't even know you're there, right? As we call the NPCs of the universe, right? Now, if you've ever entertained this sort of consensus reality theories, it feeds into this holographic universe thing beautifully. And that is that when life was in its most primitive form, not in this reality, I did a whole episode on this called The Origin of Man, way back in, I think, season 1, which is on a different YouTube channel. The idea is, of course, as we conceive of things, we're inventing things, because conceiving forms, again, if we have if we can exert force on the implicate from our bias or from our imaginative creativeness, then it simply creates itself. Ever wonder how God, if that story was ever true, created everything in 7 days, rested on the 7th day, as a matter of fact. He said, let there be light, and there was light. Boom. That is exactly what we're talking about. But you have to have a grasp of this paradigm in order to affect things like you believe they can be affected. If you have the faith, you can move a mountain or a molehill, right? It's the same exact thing. So when we look at these monolithic structures, megalithic structures like the pyramids and other humongous obelisks and things like that, we're wondering how they were built. Now, there's really no indication that this was just do whatever you want, because we have obelisks that cracked, that stayed in the ground, and if they could just simply do anything, they'd probably belt them all back down, and it would be not what we're actually seeing. But what if there was a society that could do a lot more? They at least hadn't forgotten everything. There's gurus out there that say they can do all kinds of wild stuff. We're going to talk about one that's heavily implicated in the book. And what you have to know about Michael Talbot is he considers himself a psychic. He says he can see auras. So he's one of those guys that's sort of sitting on the edge of everything. And I think that his gullibility probably couldn't be any higher. There's an Indian guru out there named Sai Baba. I'm not sure exactly how they say it. I think it's like the Saibaba. When you see this guy, he is always dressed usually in an orange sort of loose-flowing outfit. He's been in a lot of things in his lifetime, but his last several decades were in this particular outfit. I've mentioned this guy in episodes without knowing his name. So let me ceremoniously retract anything I've ever said about this guy being legit. He turned into what lots of these dudes turn into, which is he was a sleight of hand guy. and we have lots of videos of him doing this now. His sleeves always came right down to his hand, so he just basically has a bunch of stuff racked up inside of his sleeves. And there is a guy that's an Indian physicist and scientist, and he says that he pulled his sleeves all the way up to his elbows, and he still produced jewelry. But his big thing was to do this sort of twirly thing with his hand, and suddenly produce a piece of jewelry and hand it off. And what Michael Talbert talks about is this one piece of jewelry that was created by him. I've mentioned this several times. And he took it back to London, and they looked at it. He said, man, the craftsmanship on this is crazy. Turns out he's done tens of thousands of pieces of this jewelry, which is about 24 karat. But in giving away a few bucks worth of jewelry over there, he gains a gigantic empire of money. And the amount of people that showed up to worship this guy like he is literally God himself is phenomenal. The Paul Harvey to his story is that even in India, where you can, in certain areas, get away with murder, basically, the locals were concerned because the reports were coming in for the last several years of his life. This guy's a pedophile. And so he used that status to do this kind of stuff. He has scenes where he's handing over a trophy to some guy. It's got a mount on it. It's got a trophy on the top, and he is reaching underneath trying to find this piece of jewelry that he's about to do this little shindig bit with, pulls it out, and you can see him finally get it. He pulls it to his hand, puts his hand underneath the trophy to completely hide his hand until the guy takes it away. Then he reaches down and does this little epileptic fit thing, and he pulls out this piece of jewelry and gives it to this guy. Josh Blue would think that's very funny. Now, I just happen to have a really good friend of mine who is a up-close magician. This guy, I filmed him at the Magic Castle a number of times. I've just been at his table. See, the Magic Castle is a place in Los Angeles very close to the Hollywood Bowl. It is a real legit location. They have a library in there that you have to be a member, and you have to have certain permissions to literally get to certain parts of the library. It's not terribly gigantic, but they have real magic books in there, which is not real magic, but it's just real tricks to make you believe someone's got abilities, right? The Magic Castle is a place you got to dress up to get in the front door. You got to wear, the men have to wear suits and ties. Typically people wear zoot suits and old kind of 30s clothes. The women have to wear a dress to get in the front door. You walk in, you have to be invited by one of the members of the castle. So some magician has got to basically put you on the list. You get in the door, there's a beautiful bar and kind of a speakeasy looking place at the beginning. There's a big stage on the second floor. But this place is a gigantic house, and there's a full basement. But there are secret rooms all over the place, and the only way you find them is to walk in a circle enough that when someone opens the door, you find it and you hop in. And one of the rooms that my friend Jeffrey Bornstein actually does some close magic in, close hand magic stuff. You walk in there, and it's a little tiny table. It might be 4 or 5 feet tops, green felt with a double slip on it. For those of you who know what that is, there's like a second piece of felt on it. And there's front row seats where you're literally staring at his hands. I mean, you're 2 feet, your eyeballs are 2 feet from his hands. And there's, I think, 2 benches, 1 or 2 benches above. I've seen this guy because I know him. I've seen him do stuff that just blows my mind. I've videotaped the guy pickpocketing people, pulling watches off people, and belts off people, and I can finally see it in the film how he's doing that. But when he does this close hand magic stuff, close coin work, it is nothing shy of a miracle of how he pulls stuff out of absolutely nothing. And there's a felt, there's a second piece of felt on the normal felt, and they'll show it to you. It's like, here, try to catch me doing something. This guy will pull all kinds of coins, put coins in your hand. You don't even think you have anything in your hand, and boom, you've got everything in your hand at the end of the magic trick. But a second ago, you didn't have anything in your hand. This guy is a misdirection god of this technology. But one of the final things he does in one of these close-up hand things, if you want to believe this Baba guy is real, and if you hear this story from this physicist, who that doesn't give you any qualifications to know about magical misdirection, my buddy pulls out a coin. It must be about 3 inches in diameter, and it's probably about 1/8 of an inch thick. It weighs a ton. When he drops it, goes boof on the table. I think he sends it home with you most of the time. But he's got his sleeves rolled way up to his biceps, and the dude's ripped. He's a former Marine stuntman in Hollywood. You can actually see him in Cobra with Sylvester Stallone. Sylvester Stallone actually broke his nose in the scene on the bus. But this dude will pull this thing out of nowhere. Now, obviously, it's somewhere. It may be under the felt, but man, that felt doesn't breathe, man. It doesn't move. I don't know why it's even there. It's obviously playing a role in this whole thing. The guy never reaches behind his back, never does anything. But if he had anything in his hand, he's hiding it in his fingers, pinched between the fingers, and all of a sudden you got the card. This guy's a genius at everything. So knowing Jeffrey and knowing what I saw on this Baba videos, Michael Talbot looks like an ass putting this guy in his book and just constantly telling his stories like there's no other way that this could happen. What I find disheartening about the fact that one of the other attributes of Michael Talbot, the guy who wrote the book, and this doesn't affect Bohm's theory whatsoever, I'm just giving you a disclaimer in the middle of this, is that psychics are very gullible. And that's a horrible association. It's great to have a person who's a skeptic and still believes in something psychic happening. But if you believe in that and you believe in everything and you haven't done any research on any of this stuff to find out, well, that's probably just sleight of hand stuff, it discounts everything else you say. But what's nice about the book is when it goes after this David Bohm, the credibility comes back. And just do your independent research on this stuff. So one of the other areas in the book that goes back to science and gets out of the psychic realm is to look at how time itself would be in existence or being perceived to exist within this paradigm of this holographic universe. Now, on this show, I tell you the old line that Douglas Adams said, time is an illusion, lunchtime is doubly so. It's true. There's no real tangible thing that is time in terms of rewinding and going forward. So I'm going to give you an analogy of time as it might exist without really being in existence. What's time? Time is your memory of a previous state of the universe. That's the only thing that makes you think time exists. You were small and now you're big. I've been saying that a lot in the recent episodes. So if you were to say, well, if you were to get down to the smallest unit of energy that exists, that has any state, positive, negative, left, right, up, down, and then you built a big cube out of that theory. So every point in the cube is a different state of the entire universe. And you're at one point moving through this cube, picking the next socket that you're going to experience something in, but you have choice. Now, the next thing that happens, and the next points that you have access to, is what is technically possible from where you are right now. So if it's not, I'm just going to pose this, if it's not possible for you to be in your living room listening to this and suddenly be on the surface of whatever the moon is, then that's not in your next option. But whatever you could do in your next second, all those points are available. If that's an infinite point set, then there's an infinite density of this thing. You don't need to worry about that too much. So you're traveling through and you're picking the next second. Like I used to say in my old shows, pick the best seconds that you can pick. Okay. Well, I had a weird experience. I've had a couple where I've predicted the future. One was, again, I walked into a kitchen. I'm just repeating this because it's going to get to the cube. Walked into a kitchen and I could feel something. I basically said, someone's going to be at that door and they're going to be hurt. And literally 3 seconds, 4 seconds later, the door pounds. A 5-year-old kid who lived at the house had been bitten by the dog in his stomach. So bad they had to rush him to the hospital. The mother saw me predict it and never came back to me to question me about it. Really bizarre, right? She was a descendant of John Adams, by the way. But the other big one for me was the night before 9/11. I'm sitting in my girlfriend's apartment. I'm staring at a white ceiling. I have a lamp on my end. She has a lamp on her end. The whole room's white. And I had this feeling. I said to her, I'm just staring at the ceiling. You know what you do before she gets done with whatever she's doing to turn the lights off, right? And I said, I feel like something bad's going to happen. And all of a sudden, I see 2 commercial flights fly past each other and over my head. And I said, I think it's going to have something to do with planes. This is probably technically September 11th. I mean, it's technically crossed over midnight. And sure enough, the next day I woke up to a phone call. She had left and gone to work. I wasn't usually spending the night at her place. I lived like 3 houses down. And she's calling her own phone, which I'm not going to answer someone else's phone, but I'm like, wow, it won't stop. So I picked it up. It's her. And she's like, turn on the TV. Something's going on in New York. And of course, as the narrative goes, planes were involved and the towers going down. How was I able to see that? It happened. It really happened. Well, go back to the holographic universe situation. Instead of this little scene that we've got, and we're bouncing a laser off of it, creating all those ripples. Well, what if any type of state model, this cube of all the things that could possibly happen, are also being bounced off of constantly? So all the states that could possibly occur, create your imagination of what you could do with your life if you focus on that. You focus on the frequency of what could you be tomorrow, the next day. How might I plan my life a little bit to control this video game that is life? So I always tell you this, the greatest gift you can give a child, and the younger that, as soon as they can understand the words coming out of your mouth, you walk up to a child and say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Now all of a sudden, they tune their brain. It's not a bias of what they can't do. It's a bias of what they can do. And I sometimes ask you, well, what are my options, right? Some version of that statement. And you go, anything that you're capable of doing, you can do. The only limitations might be a 5-foot Asian woman might not be a NBA male basketball player. That's the only limitations you've got, but that leaves a whole lot open, doesn't it? Well, I think most of us would agree that 9/11 was a pretty significant event, regardless of what happened that day. Wasn't it? Well, if there's a moment in time that's made out of a lot of those little points in the cube where it didn't quite go the way they wanted it to go and something more horrific happens, they totally call it off that day, or it happens that day, you get ripples, massive psychological ripples, as the souls that are in that particular choice start to just scream. It's like that scene in Star Wars where they blow up, was it Endor? And, Obi-Wan Kenobi just goes, oh my God, he's inside the Millennium Falcon. And it's like a billion voices just screamed because he felt everyone dying on that planet when Tarkin blew it up. I know it's a fictional thing, but just make the planet New York City and make the explosion the collection of what happened that day. And I'm sitting there a few hours before this all occurs, and I'm sensing it. I'm sensing that ripples. I'm getting close enough to the ripples that now I can make sense out of what it is. You could be on a lake, and some big giant boat drives by, but you can't even see it. You weren't looking, let's put it that way. And here come the ripples, and you're like, man, something big must have been out there to create these ripples. I can't see it, but I can feel it. You're deducing, you're unfolding reality, you're unfolding what you're seeing. It's just an analogy of what time might be. But that might explain a lot of why people have premonitions and can see things. You might have an idea like, man, it's not safe. That road's not safe. That bridge isn't safe. There's an old Twilight Zone. That bridge isn't safe, right? And you avoid it, but other people go on it, and they perish, and you survive. You call something off, and it's the best decision you ever made in your life. I think if you've ever been angry in your life, and you were going to do something silly, something destructive, we'll just leave it at that, and you chose not to do it, you immediately feel great that you did do it. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he was talking about reacting to something and falling into the negativity and reacting. He goes, man, every time I do something like that, I feel bad immediately, and I feel stupid that I actually let the negativity get a hold of me. It's almost like you get caught up in the ripples and you get pulled into it, like a wave sucking you out to the ocean. But one of the other big things, which is why Talbert mentioned this Sai Baba guy, was PK, which is, telekinesis. Can we manifest this control of reality to a point we can actually synthesize something out of nothing? Well, if that's a capability, this book was written and released, I believe, in 1991. If this is possible, with the introduction of the cell phone, it has really leveled the playing field. But we're going to get into this in one second. Why isn't there some insane person that doesn't believe in any limitations of anything. They believe they can fly. They can believe they can do everything. Well, why hasn't one of them used that different state of consciousness that none of us have to manifest things that are absolutely insane? A big, giant, 40-story pink elephant. Why not? They don't have any limitations. They believe they can't do it. In fact, that's why they're in an asylum, is because they believe they can. And they're unable to escape an asylum because they don't have these abilities to bend bars and kill human beings at will and all this other stuff. So if that exists, and again, there's been a lot of telekinesis stuff where they say people can move things with their minds, but now that we've got everything recorded 24/7, we're not seeing this evidence anymore. So it's one thing to have, 10 universities, so we've definitely got proof this happens, but where's the footage? That's all we need to believe this, right? But now let me reverse this, because this is not covered in the book, and this for me becomes how we start delivering on my promise at the end of this episode. What was a hologram in the first place? You put a bunch of stationary objects, have to be stationary, otherwise it'll get out of focus, and you expose it to these two lasers, and it records it into the film. They're there, and they exude the frequencies of the laser bouncing off of them. That's mass being hit by light, stored in a photograph. Okay. Whether or not you completely grasp that just yet, I know you get what I'm saying. But now imagine there's this thing called the neural peptide in the brain. The neural peptide is built in the brain based on your thought process. It's a peptide, which is a very tangible thing, but it's constructed out of your thoughts and dumped into your body. This is what the movie What the Bleep Do We Know goes into great detail about. That can be responsible for you becoming exactly who you think you are. So it's very, very important that you not let anybody in your brain to tell you that you're not something, that you're something that you don't want to be. And it's very important that when they say meditation, I don't think about like out-of-body experiences and all this other wild stuff. Just think about meditating 5 to 20 minutes a day. You're driving in your car, just turn the radio off, listen to your thoughts. That's one thing humans seem to be terrified of these days. And just say, well, who am I? And answer the question as genuinely as you can, but with the most idealistic view of your body and who you are. I'm healthy. I'm in shape. Don't worry about if you are in shape. My family has a really good muscle structure, whatever the hell you want to be. I'm actually very clear of thought. I can solve problems that no one else can solve. Even if you're not able to do that yet, that's how you program your mind, as if it is already the fact. Your neuropeptides will build in your mind, dump in your body, and get you as close to that finish line as you possibly can. But just like a tree, I don't know if any of you have ever planted a tree. The one thing you got to do to get a tree to grow is water the hell out of it, and you got to water it every single day for quite a long time before it finally takes root and it's able to live on its own without a hose. You're the same way. Any one of these neuropeptides that you create, well, it's a tiny little thing responsible for, 36 quadrillion cells. That's the average human body. So you're going to need to make a few of these things to start really affecting yourself. So you need to create some routine in your life where you can actually create these neuropeptides and push them into your body. Now that's a little lesson for you and you alone to do while you are by yourself. Now, I set that up in a particular way so the next thing I say hopefully has a lot of impact on you, okay? And I cannot stress how utterly real this is and how the holographic universe and David Bohm has given us an amazing understanding of how we could be polluted with just like the poison of someone else's thoughts. How many of you feel like when you turn a television on or when you surf the internet, it's just acidic and negative and downer, and they're just, there's a war going on everywhere. There's some group of people you're supposed to hate. Sometimes it's because they're different shade than you are. Sometimes it's because they like different things than you like. And it just seems like the people that are the most upset, people that make videos of themselves in their cars, bawling their brains out, they are ingesting tons and tons of what's being projected at them. It doesn't mean that their arguments are inaccurate. It just means that they live a really negative life. And then you watch it. You watch what the news says. You watch what television says. You watch what movies say. There's agenda stuck in that stuff. Well, what was the whole theory about this holographic universe thing? There's the explicate, that's your bias that you interpret the implicate from. That bias circuit. Remember I told you what you see rolls through different chambers in your brain before getting to your visual cortex. Sentient areas of your brain that have bias. That's why the 85-pound woman who's about to die of malnutrition might see herself as weighing 220 pounds and thinks she needs to skim back a little bit on the water and bread she's eating today. Okay, if all the things you're putting inside your mind are programming that bias circuit in your brain without your knowledge, without your conscious knowledge, what do they say about the subconscious in general? Well, it's a little kid that believes everything it's told. It's like Rick Gervais' movie Invention of a Lie, which is a great movie, by the way. Everybody just believed everything. They spoke what was on their mind constantly. It's actually a hilarious film. I just watched it for the first time a couple weeks ago. If you allow it in, then when you get hit by the second laser, remember that? So you got one laser that's programming you. And that's all the stuff you take into your brain. It's all the stuff you add to your being. It's the stuff you add to your bias circuits. And then you get hit by the second beam, which is basically anyone interacting with you, or you just simply being the unfolder of this reality. The second beam of the hologram is the one that just projects it back out of the film after it's developed. Let's just say that's you. That's just you living your life and unfolding this bias that's being pushed into you. Okay, well, let me give you a different one. There's all this technology right now to get into your brain, to put chips inside your head. And they're claiming all kinds of victories, which they may or may not actually be accomplishing, but people tend to believe everything they heard if it's presented as a truth, right? And repetition is the greatest form of brainwash, right? Well, what would happen, because we talked about the sympathetic harmonies technology invented by the DoD in the late 60s, I believe it was 1967. They had perfected 7 states of consciousness by simply beaming at you a frequency. Now take holographic universe technology, that idea, that paradigm. Well, that's a very organic interpretation of reality. One is it's everything that's really there is there, and that's the implicate, and your bias unfolding is the explicate. But what if someone were to simply beam at you through a telephone, through a TV, through whatever, movie, whatever, or some array of satellites over your head? They give you your own custom explicate unfolding bias. They send it straight at you such that you start seeing the universe the way they want you to see the universe. Any decision that you can make in your life could be heavily affected by this. So am I trying to give you the oogie boogie stuff? Well, how about this? If you were living a really decent life because you had policed this, you had basically thought about this paradigm and said, you know what, you're right. I need to really monitor what I take into myself because it could be going into my subconscious as a bias without me really understanding it's happening. Let's say you get exposed 100 times to you should be racist against this group of people. The first 88 times, you don't realize it's actually occurring. But by the 89th time and the 90th time, you're starting to become a racist. And it feels so guttural to you. Yes, you know what? I've just been lying to myself the entire time. I should have been racist my whole life. Simply because the first 88 times is being stuck in your subconscious, making you believe it's a memory that you're having that's legit. You've already put it in the truth pile. Remember, there's 3 piles in your brain: true, false, and maybe. The maybe pile should be a skyscraper. The true one should be a little group of books over here, and the lie one should be another skyscraper. If you were living a good life because you policed these 3 piles really well, and suddenly you found yourself feeling completely the opposite person that you really are, you're thinking, man, I don't feel these kind of feelings. Why am I feeling hate all of a sudden? You'll notice it. It's like taking the frog and throwing him in boiling water. He'll jump out. Boil him slowly, and he doesn't realize it's happening. Well, don't think that they don't know that. We got that analogy because that's probably their mechanism of how anything is being projected at you. We know that no one has our back, right? News could be a very positive experience with, maybe some sentimental articles for people that have passed away, either due to accident or age or whatever. Maybe they're a favorite movie star of yours or what have you. But instead, it's very in your face. It's very clickbait stuff. The headlines don't even tell you what's really going on. So you got to click to get the other half of the sentence, which will tell you what chemicals in cookies that kills you, right? They won't just say it in the front because they don't really care about your health. If anyone cared about your health and they found a poison in food, it would just be right there. Don't eat this because it has this chemical. But no, they're trying to monetize suffering. Isn't that interesting? You want to be an instrument that when the air flows through the instrument, let's just say, it's your song. It's not their song. And this is where we have to realize this might be the way things work. I mean, it's almost obvious this is the way it works, and that we know people see the same exact thing, the same exact implicate thing in the universe right in front of you, and they have a different thought. I think Mercedes are the ugliest cars on planet Earth. I think Porsches are the ugliest cars on planet Earth. That's just a tired form factor. I'm so done ever seeing that again. I look at a Bugatti, especially the custom ones for the Arabs. Oh boy, this is a UFO with four wheels, right? A most amazing handcrafted vehicle I've ever seen in my life. But you might look at it and think, oh man, no, I want the other thing. I've been thinking about this since I was 8 years old. Had the poster on my wall when I was a kid. I'm going to spend all my money and get that car. And that's fine, right? There's no problem with those biases. I think most of you probably believe that man really wants to be at peace in this universe, don't we? We want to be productive, creative, sort of that world that Gene Roddenberry created in Star Trek, right? Which is, there's no money. You just find your aptitude that you want, your trade skill. They'll educate you. You can't just get in Starfleet just being a bum on the side of the road. You're going to study in school, get in Starfleet and get out there. But you could be broke as a joke and get into Starfleet. There's plenty of characters in that fictional scenario that does that, right? Consequently, the funny thing about that, the irony is they made a Star Trek game that you can play on your iPad. Everything's $100 in the game. Like any upgrade's $100. Completely stabbing the franchise in the back. So how do they get us so riled up? I mean, how do they get the world to hate everybody? Sometimes it's just easy. Give them a book and have a little passage in there that says these people are inferior and you're superior. And if you believe that kind of crap, well, there may not be a lot of hope for your unfolding process. But for those of us who are living in fairly decent pockets of the universe where we can actually make good decisions, getting away from all the stuff is the way to live, right? But they took this technology a little bit further, this paradigm. They looked at dreams and they looked at the afterlife. What they figured out about afterlife was they looked at all these near-death experiences, otherwise known as NDEs. And they said, what's wild about this is that there's definitely no two NDEs that are identical, really, but they have a lot of attributes. I've been talking about this a lot. Someone usually comes up to you in whatever native language you speak and says it's not your time. You got to go back, and they take you back down to your body. That seems to be one of the most common denominator things that happens. What's really interesting is a lot of Anglo-Saxon white kids in America will see Hindu or Tibetan monks floating by. Wow, they don't really have any background with that imagery. They don't have any knowledge of the Tibetan religion, but they'll see them float by in their NDEs. Really interesting how that wild imagery pops in. But they looked at it and they said, once you subtract out of all the NDE experiences that have been written down and documented, you get rid of the cultural biases, what's left, once you distill it out, right, is very common stuff. And so what they ended up thinking was, okay, death isn't death. Death isn't death at all. We're stuck in a human form right now because perhaps we chose to be here. Maybe we didn't. We'll see if Shirley MacLaine's right about that. But when you die, you go into this beautiful free realm where now it's your explicate is extremely purified because you're no longer hanging on to your human bias. This accumulation is happening because you're in a human state. Now, if you're probably some other intelligent life force, let's say there's any other form other than humanity, it's going to happen again, most likely. It depends on what's around you in that particular environment. We know that there's been eras in history for almost every single country when it was in its sweet golden era, where for a decade or 3 decades, people were happy. They had figured out the system on how to live life. The press was free and told the truth most of the time. Television, radio, and film hadn't perhaps developed to a point to destroy everything. But these people kind of creep in. Those people that want to kind of, influence things, they creep in and they start creating these hate games. I'll beg you to move that stuff out of your life and just watch what happens, right? But dreams are interesting. We've talked about it a lot on the show, but now think about this whole thing that's going on. You are going to sleep. Now, the gurus of the world, the Hindus especially, have a lot of different explanations for this kind of stuff, and you can take it with a grain of salt that they're explaining things with their metaphors and their understanding of the universe. But if you just take it at face value, you're letting go of the bias machine, at least in a large part. Your physiology that might be interacting with this bias circuit that might be built somehow using the flesh inside your head starts to peer off, and you go into this free-flowing world. Now, my Origin of Man episode, what I suggested, and the whole episode is this. I take you back to a theoretical beginning of all reality that we understand today. And I suggest that if we were just sitting around like the Q continuum in Star Trek, where we just live forever and we can do whatever we want, it's a total dream state constantly. It could be heaven in some people's definitions. We might actually get bored and we might actually start creating this reality that we're in. Wouldn't it be interesting to have like a beginning, middle, and end, so we really appreciate what we have, and as we lose people that we love, we miss them, and we really appreciate the fabric of love, because if you had everyone around you and had everything you ever wanted, how do you know love exists? There's no negative to prove a positive. So they created this paradigm as a system to just exist forever. It just makes it nice. You're born, you don't really, on average, you don't remember your previous life. You may start feeling it as you get older. Apparently some kids remember their previous lives, as we talked about several times on the show. But what would dreams be? What I suggest in the episode is that that's the contract we have with ourselves. Well, I don't want to lose total access to this beautiful reality that we have, where we're very fluid and we can have anything that we can imagine. So the idea was everything sleeps. Everything sleeps in this world. I asked ChatGPT once, I said, is there any animal that doesn't sleep? And it came up with a couple animals that it said it didn't think slept, but the level of consciousness in these beings, one was like coral or something weird like that, but it wasn't like an insect. Everything sleeps. And again, the scientists have just made up reasons why we have to sleep. Cyclical, biofeedback rhythms that we're in and that kind of stuff. Doesn't really make any sense. If you sat in a bed for 2 days and just did nothing, I mean, you barely moved your muscles, you relaxed, you kept your eyes closed, but you're conscious, why couldn't you stay up for 2 days? You're not tired, right? They'll say, oh, it's you filing away your memories and all that kind of stuff. Well, I don't think I file away my memories while I'm asleep. And I dream real time. So 8 hours is 8 hours of dreams. As soon as I start dreaming, it's real time. It's not this split-second junk they teach you. But it might just be you and I leaving the bias, and then all of a sudden we can bring in what we understand into our dreams. Anything we don't understand, it's a little more difficult to bring it into your dreams. Why have I never dreamed of being in Paris? Because I don't remember it as an adult. I've been to London 3 times. But I don't ever dream about being in London. I don't think I ever have, even when I was in London, So it's interesting. What's most prominent in your system might show up in your dreams. But for me, I dream locations that don't exist almost all the time, people that don't exist. Every once in a while, a loved one gets in there. It's kind of annoying. Every once in a while, a loved one sneaks in, and that kind of annoys me because I don't want anyone that really exists in my life getting caught up in some dream that Might make them look bad to me when I wake up. But it happens every once in a while, doesn't it? If we are frequency unfolders, then the suggestion is we are also frequency. We know we're frequencies. We're a bunch of energy. We're literally made of what the sunlight verb that's out there. It's throwing this particle within the verb of light at us. And that's what we're made of. It's what our planet's made of. It's what the whole universe is made of. At some point, there's this fundamental particle or unit of energy, mass, that resists movement that we are made out of. And that is how you perceive everything. And I think you know that. We don't talk about it that much. A lot of folks I've been talking to who watch the show are really, I would almost use the word struggling with trying to figure out some paradigm of the universe that makes any sense. Why are there weird deja vu moments? Sometimes moments that are deja vu that have premonition stuck inside them. So you start feeling this amazing familiarity with the situation. Not just a place. Not just there's a room down there and this and that. Now you're feeling the next events that are about to occur. And you can actually tell people in the room, this is about to occur. And it does. And once you do that one time, the whole universe is different to you. Once you meet Walt Disney and he tells you where to find Bob Gurr in the park. It happened to me, man. It was like, Walt's been dead for a really long time. But I found Bob Gurr standing in the middle of the park, right where Walt said he would be. Complete in an area of the park I would never go. Walk straight to him with two other people with us. He had a buddy, and I had my girlfriend at the time. Changes the whole universe. And that's nice to say. And you might just say, well, what did that really prove to you? Well, it sort of suggests an afterlife of some sort. That his distinguished spirit is still in that form, and he has access when certain perfect storm situations occur, and he can talk to you if he really wants to talk to you. But that still doesn't explain the fabric of this place. It merely was a parlor trick of sorts. Now, one of the things that you can start adding to this is starting to, one, give this theory a chance in your mind. Go back into the world tomorrow and start to think about the idea that you're unfolding reality with your biases. Start to watch other people unfold reality with their bias. Don't worry about what's on your telephone, which is your new TV, or anything you hear from the outside world, unless you're talking to someone who's real in your life and you're having this conversation. But I was telling a friend today, I said, look, I was talking about this theory, and it was really sinking in. I said, look, the only difference between you being a scientist in your mind and someone else being a scientist in your mind is usually a bunch of academic hoopla, paperwork, and if someone's got a degree. And if someone can actually, like Bohm, figure something out, well, then you can really go, man, that dude really figured some stuff out. But you're a scientist too. You really are. And you know what? In terms of knowing yourself, if you're open-minded and you're really willing to suffer the humiliation of existence, meaning your positives and negatives are all acknowledged in your brain. You don't have to share it with anybody. But as long as inside your inner voice, you're like, well, I'm pretty good at that. And like I was a jerk back in the day, but you're not that person anymore. That's one thing you have to always do. You get a blank check every day. Every day you wake up, it's a blank check. Whatever you did yesterday and the days before, you do not have to repeat that moving forward. You can throw those biases out of your brain as you continue to unfold the universe. There's the placebo effect. What would be the placebo effect inside the holographic universe? Well, your biases are gone about not being able to be healed by a particular regimen or ritual, whether it be medicine, the laying of hands, whatever it is. There was a story where a woman had a problem with her spleen, I believe it was. They had figured it out. And so she was a meditator, and she was sort of close to the holographic universe theory. And she actually argued, because it wasn't healing as fast as she wanted to heal. She was expecting some overnight healing process through meditation. It can be technically overnight when it comes to the entire span of your lifetime. But she was looking for literally days. Just heal up, just be okay. So the funny story goes is that she actually chastised during a meditative experience her spleen, consciously testing, I'm going to yell at my spleen to behave right and heal itself. And she got more sick. And she actually ended up telling someone in the program that that's exactly what she did. And this other person, which was a very kind of touchy-feely, in-touch person, empathetic human being, said, well, that's the problem. Your spleen was doing what it thought it was supposed to do. And it was confused, and it was getting sick, and it was doing the wrong thing. Don't yell at your spleen. Think positive thoughts towards your spleen. All that stuff you did to convince it to do the right thing, never stop that. Always think positive things. Well, think about the neural peptide. If the neural peptide does what we're pretty sure it does, and she's angry with one part of her body, well, the neural peptide might try to kill the spleen. So being a positive human being is so much more powerful than just the cliche of being a positive human being. I've got friends that take in very little data from the outside world. They're very creative people. One of my buddies is a painter, and he just sits in that paint and creates things he loves on canvas. What do you think that frequency is for that dude? He is doing what he loves and what he's really good at. And boy, is this guy good at this stuff. But he's also staring at content that warms his heart. You got to find your little mechanism, your little cubbyhole, your little cul-de-sac inside your mind. A lot of times they chastise us for getting nostalgic as we get older. I don't live in the past and yada yada. Well, okay. It depends if the future or the present, it depends if the present is actually exuding the frequency that you want to live in. Now, keeping your 80s high hair, that might be a little bit of a stretch. But if it turns you on, you're not hurting anybody, then just do that, right? But it occurred to me today that for a lot of us who lived in very privileged decades, the 70s, the 80s, especially those two decades. Obviously, the first half of the 70s was finishing up the Vietnam War in America, so there was a lot of trials and tribulations. But the second half was phenomenal, and all through the 80s was amazing. It wasn't until Desert Storm that we got some negativity in the 90s. Now, your era, you're probably going to feel like those 15 years of your life, whenever you were born, were your golden age. But I don't find anyone really worshiping those other decades after that. They'll remember a couple good songs and a couple neat movies and here and there, but they don't. Those of us who lived in the late 70s and 80s, the whole thing, start to finish, was just turn the radio on, amazing music. Go to the movies, great movies. Everything was phenomenal. And we're all like go-lucky kind of guys. And there's actually videos on YouTube where people recorded going to like a 7-Eleven in the 80s, and you just have the most fun-loving people in these videos, and people are like, where the hell are those people? Now we're all gangsters and we're all hard, we're just trying to figure out how to kill the next person that walks in front of us. It's really sad, right? So the reason why I mention that is that it occurred to me today that nostalgia might be the responsibility of the older generation to say, hey, it doesn't have to be this negative thing. We can take some of that frequency of unfolding and push that into the kids of today or our grandkids and say, hey, there's another way to interpret this place. Those of you who like old movies like I do, you watch the 30s, but especially the 40s and the 50s, man, there's some amazing films out there where guys and gals just seem incredibly idealistic. Even in the middle of like murder noir movies and that kind of stuff, still it's pretty phenomenal how positive these individuals were. Because they hadn't had even with World War I and II, these men still came out being pretty truthful. They thought their government was something they could trust. And it was a very interesting era. That's why I got the baby boomer thing, because the war ended and everybody was pounding out kids. And those kids lived, other than the duck and cover phase, and maybe something that got pulled into the Korean War, but the kids of the 50s made all the movies in the 70s and the early 80s. And those were the gems of Hollywood's history, right? And we keep sequeling those nostalgic movies from the past. And why do you think that is? Because they were better movies to begin with, right? I think the original Willy Wonka was made in 1971. They sequeled it because that magic has been gone, and they can't even touch the magic of the original one, right? They redo the Star Wars, and we lose all the essence of Star Wars. Kind of sad, right? We have to take care of these biases. I know I'm saying this 1,000 times, but repetition is good for your brain, right? I want you to take away from this episode a completely different understanding of how the universe might work. In terms of reading this book, well, you can. You're going to get into Talbert's utter belief of psychic abilities. And if that's your thing, you're going to know a lot of people in the book. Just understand this Baba guy was a complete fraud. I mean, what I suspect with a lot of psychics in the world is they did have very legitimate experiences, and they perhaps have the ability to do certain things in much, I would say, less frequent occurrences. And so I forgot that guy that had his sort of town hall meeting. Gosh, I can't believe I didn't remember that guy's name, but he would do these psychic readings for people. And one of my friends went to a recording. He said the show was 12 hours long, cut down to 1 hour, because he's being put on demand to read people's minds and have a bunch of stuff. Well, out of 12 hours, you could make, with cold reading and warm reading techniques of palm reading, you can find an hour's worth of fairly believable content in people, but you're going to be making mistakes 80% of the time. That's pure randomness, right? So I would say just try to be as diligent as you possibly can to check out other theories about how things can work. Use your mind more than going out to have biases injected in you from looking stuff up online, right? Understand that, pharmaceutical commercials on TV are quite amazing things. And again, yours truly worked in that industry for 2.5 years at the tippy top. And we had one meeting that was all about the bias of advertising and convincing people that they're sick by arranging the commercials statements to give you the certainty that you have the illness that they're actually having the treatment for. Not the cure, but the treatment. And they started off the conversation by saying that there was a certain community in Europe that basically was catching whiplash. He talked about it at length. Of course, whiplash requires blunt force trauma to get. You don't just get whiplash. Well, people were catching whiplash from each other because of the implication, the bias in their mind. They were unfolding reality and having, muscle problems. Pharmaceutical commercials are absolutely designed to make you believe you have the illness that they are hoping you have in order to buy their product. They talk to you like you've already got it. That's why you have to be very careful. That's why I don't watch anything with those type of commercials. I don't watch anything with any commercials whatsoever. If you have a service like YouTube, buy the Red account, which is like, $10 a month or something like that, so you don't have to watch ads. It's worth its weight in gold. You don't want that extra bias programming. But just take a survey of your life at your next earliest convenience. If you turn off this video, think about it. Where am I taking in, any bias from the outside world that I don't approve of, or that it's difficult for me to instantaneously filter? And that's where you want to cut it off. And then if you want to reintroduce it, do it extremely slowly. Remember, we want that temperature change to be as great as possible. You're the frog, and if you happen to jump into some boiling water, you want to feel that. You want to jump out and get out. But the more you condition yourself to have your biases, not given to you by parents, unless they're people you really admire and you've really vetted, I want to be like them, it's okay to make up your own mind. In my life, probably in my early 30s, I had the courage. It just happened to me serendipitously, like accidentally. I just said, you know what? I'm going to push out everything that I put in my mind. I'm going to bring it all back in slowly. It's going to be in those 3 piles: true, false, or maybe. It's just like a hoarder exercise. Push all the possessions out in the front of the house, throw away most of it, bring in a very simple, beautiful, minimalistic version of you. It's the most pure version of you. It doesn't matter if you're in a wheelchair or you're an Olympic runner. Your life can be as amazing as you can conceive it to be. Why not go that route? Why not unfold the best possible reality that you have by cleaning out the old brain, cleaning out your spirit? Realize you are an amazing sensory mechanism. People say that they actually can get trained to see auras. I had an aunt and uncle went down this path, and they said they could see it after they went through it. least likely two human beings to do this. They weren't real psychic people or anything. They didn't believe anything that wasn't sort of on paper, but they said they were able to do it. Pretty amazing. They can do it. You and I can do it, if that's important to you. You may be fine without it. I know this is a really weird episode, but this is when I finally reinterpreted the book. I had done this episode back in season 1. I'm going to delete that one completely. This is, I think, an incredible exercise, if nothing else, in just reinterpreting everything that you see by the fact that reality's coming to you in a bunch of frequencies way beyond just light. You are an amazing, infinite creature that can take it all in. You can take it all in. So be careful what you take in. Be the police in your own state, right? Anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. Everything's up there. Shirts, podcasts, videos. There's free Patreon. I usually publish things first on Patreon. At least the audio comes out first there if you guys really want the audio fast before the website publishes it. I usually leave an episode up until it hits about 1,000, depending on its subject matter. This one will probably go a little quicker because it probably won't get a lot of views, but I'm going to bring you what I love as opposed to just what's popular out there. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.